Chairman, we are now live on YouTube.
Thank you, Jeanette, and good morning and welcome to this meeting of Boston Borough Council's Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Tom Ashton and I'm the chairman of this committee, and my vice chairman to my right is Councillor Alison Austin. Before we move into the preliminary items, may I ask that if any councillor cannot hear the meeting at any point, they advise me immediately. This is a decision-making committee and members need to be able to hear all presentations and deliberations. And further to experience that we've had in this room and with these meetings previously, I think the trick is to speak relatively quietly but into the microphone so that we can all hear from the audio, from the speakers in our microphone-based unit rather than hearing bouncing off of the walls. We have a number of speakers on the items before us today, and I would just give a reminder there that unless you are a designated speaker or a member of this committee or an officer of the council, you are not able to take a speaking part in today's meeting. We will now move on to part one of the agenda, which is to receive apologies for absence and notification of any substitutions. Jeanette, please.
Thank you, Chairman. There are apologies for absence from councillors Paul Goodale and Chelsea Trafford. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Jeanette. And item 2 is to sign the minutes of the last meeting held 29th of June. Are members of the committee that were present at that time happy for me to sign those minutes? Thank you. I shall do that at a quiet moment in a little while. Before we move to individual declarations, could we have the standing declaration, please? Declarations of interest.
Yes, Chairman. I confirm that standing declarations of interest will be recorded within the minutes for this meeting. For all members of this committee who are also members of Lincolnshire County Council, the South East Lincolnshire Joint Strategic Planning Committee and representatives of the internal drainage boards. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And do any members have any interest they wish to declare? Councillor Skinner, please, and Councillor Noble.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I am a ward member for Fishtoft. My property is just down the road, but it does not affect any decisions on this whatsoever. Since the posters went up in the village the day before Christmas Eve, I have not gave anybody an opinion on anything. In fact, I didn't read this paper until last night, so I have a clear and open mind. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. I was contacted by, I'm a ward member for Fishtoft, like Councillor Skinner. I was contacted by Mrs. Taylor, one of the local residents, in connection with B20. I will start again. Is that better? Can you hear me, Councillor Stevens? Thank you. I'll begin again. Right, I'm a councillor for Fishtoft, like Councillor Skinner. I was contacted by Mrs. Taylor, a local resident, who had concerns about planning application B200488, and she requested that I call it in, which I did so, and the reasons for that are given on page 14 of the document. Just like to say that I have read the papers. Obviously, I'm not prejudiced, predetermined, predisposed in any way. I'm going to listen to all the evidence. I look forward to hearing the report of the officers and the comments of my fellow councillors, and also the presentation of Mr. Wicks. Just be absolutely clear on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Noble. Councillor Bedford, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's a non-prejudicial interest, but Mr. Saul, the landowner, is a member of Witham Forth Drainage Board, so we do know him from there.
Thank you, and likewise, I'm also a member of that drainage board, but have had absolutely no conversation on this matter at all at any point. So I'm quite content that I have a completely open mind. And I also would just add to that that the other members of this committee who are members of the internal drainage board, that picked up under the standing declaration, which Jeanette very kindly read out a few moments ago. Seeing no further declarations of interest, if anything comes up during the course of the meeting, please raise it at that point. Item 4 is to receive any written questions from members of the public. Jeanette, please.
There are none, Chairman.
Thank you. And that I would just add that we have Mr. Parsons, who is our legal advisor, appearing on the screen. I would just add, Mr. Parsons, if at any point you feel the need to interject, please just turn on your microphone and speak, and we will take your intervention at that point, appreciating the importance that what you have to say on the legality and those points of our debate. So thank you for that, and welcome to you. We will move, as I say, to part 2 of the agenda and receive the planning applications. The first item of business today is B20-0488 on page 9 of the agenda, and Mr. Gildersleeve will present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just set up the presentation. Bear with me one moment. Hopefully that is reasonably clear to members. So the first application is for an outline application for 46 residential dwellings with associated works. It is really important that members note that it is all matters reserved for later approval. The location is as set out on the slide before you, and the report starts on page 13 of the report. Page 13 of the document before you. For locational purposes, this shows Fishtoft Village, Fishtoft Road coming in here at the western end of the village, the playing field located within the centre, and main crossroads at the point of the cursor here. For general locational purposes, St Guthlax Church, which is referenced in the report to the north, and Fishtoft Manor, approximately at the point of the cursor here. Gaysfield Road runs here to the south. This is Fishtoft Academy in here, and you'll see the existing arrangement of properties. The last building here being the Scout Hut, which is referenced in the report. The application site is this parcel of land in here. And again, this is just showing for indicative purposes how the proposed layout would relate to the Google Earth image. Obviously, it does come with a bit of a health warning, but it as being for indicative purposes only. This plan is the site location plan showing the extent of the red line boundary, the application site. Members will also note the extent of the blue line, which encompasses the remainder of the field beyond, including land which is subject to the second application on the agenda today. Members will note that the access point is indicated to be at the point of the cursor here off Gaysfield Road. Moving through, I have orientated this so it just appears slightly larger on screen, but this building here is the Scout Hut here, the proposed indicative access point at the point of the cursor here within the red line leading through. This area of land here is outside of the application, again within the applicant's control, and that is the field that is currently used by the Scout group for camping and other activities. Then as we move into the site, we're dealing with this portion here, which is for the 46 units with the red line boundary. So you can see that properties are generally back to back with those fronting Gaysfield Road here, leading round in that sort of block layout that is proposed and indicated, leading round to this side here, which is the northern boundary with Fishtoft Manor, which I identified earlier. Generally speaking, in terms of layout, the indicative layout shows adopted road following that block pattern. There would be SUDS features in terms of swales located along the edge of the highway layout. There would also be footways located within that, as identified. The plots generally being detached properties, apart from this cluster in here. And again, you can see some of those relationships. All of that detail is for indicative purposes. And before I move on, I'd just like to point out an element of public open space here, which is intended to serve the development, along with a proposed further piece of public open space and play area here. Some parking that is proposed here and here, which are indicated for use both by the development and the wider community. Again, just to reiterate, we are dealing with an all matters reserved application. Just running through, I'm sure members will be familiar with the general location of the site, but just running through some photographs. So this is looking north along Gazefield Road. This is the Scout Hut at the point of the cursor with its parking area at the front. The primary school is where these cars are parked here, and you can just see the blue fence. Looking back in the opposite direction, you can see the Scout Hut and that established belt of leylandii trees, which enclose the open space on all sides. The bottom left image, again, looking up Fishtoft Road, taken at a slightly different time of day at school, either pick-up or drop-off time. I believe this is one of the images that was provided through the representations that we've received. And you can see, obviously, cars associated with that use and a bus. And again, this image taken looking back towards the school, which is on the right-hand side, showing some of the properties which front Gazefield Road, which are a combination of single-storey and two-storey properties. Moving along, further along, so again, looking along to the junction here with the chapel on the corner, or the converted chapel on the corner, and that leylandii tree belt. Looking at the relationship between the Scout and that tree belt and the approximate location of the access, which would be point of the cursor here. And again, looking through at that relationship, it is important to note that the Scout Hut does have some existing windows and a fire escape onto the elevation which would front onto the indicative access road. And then this is showing that camping field that I referred to earlier. Moving through again, these are looking at the area of land that would be developed in more detail and looking at it from a few different vantage points. So the top two images are taken from the approximate position of the access road as you go into the development. You can see the rears of the properties fronting Gazefield Road here. You can see that tree belt, which is along the northern boundary with Fishtoft Manor located behind it. And again, that extends across to here, and you can see properties on the northeastern side of the village at the point of the cursor here. You can clearly see that the field is in arable agricultural use. The bottom two images are taken from the adjacent to the Hobble Bank, looking back across. So for locational purposes, this tree belt here is that leylandii tree belt that forms the recreation area for the Scout Hut. So the area that would be developed is over here to the right, so members can see that, and you can just see on the horizon the tower of St Guthlac's Church at the point of the cursor. And again, this is looking across more directly at the area that would be developed. And members will note there is a field boundary here where there is an existing drainage ditch that comes round. So effectively, the area that we're talking about is the area that I'm indicating by the cursor now, that sort of golden strip that comes through there. That's the area that would be developed. In terms of consultee responses, you will see as we move through the report that on page 16, we've had 77 letters of third-party representation, and you can see that those are summarised. And in particular, we've had separate responses from both the Scout group and the operators of Fishtoft Primary School. And then moving through in terms of the statutory consultees, which are set out on pages 18 through to 20, you will see there, as summarised by the slide, that all but one of those consultees raised no objection to the proposals, Fishtoft Parish Council being the objector. It is important to note at paragraph 6.7 and 6.8, we've got two requests there from the NHS and from the Education Authority in relation to contributions. And you will see at 6.9 the comments of our Housing Strategy Officer in relation to the affordable housing provision that is proposed. So as we move through, the key issues are set out on page 21 of the report, and they are the principle of development, design, impact on local character, impact on neighbouring amenity, flood risk and drainage, heritage matters, highway safety, affordable housing and developer contributions, and ecology and biodiversity. But I do want to really reiterate that we must remember that this is an outline application. It is all matters reserved. So principally, we are dealing with the principle of development, the number of units that are proposed, and the contributions that are proposed, with all other details being indicative. and members will be fully conversant in the outline and reserve matters procedure, wherein an applicant is required to secure the further approval of the local planning authority through reserved matters for essentially the detail of the scheme that is before us. Dealing with the principle of development, which is the fundamental matter on this application. The site is allocated in part within the local plan. It is Fishtoft 046, Fishtoft being identified as a minor service centre within the local plan, where the plan makes explicit reference to development being accommodated within the village based upon allocations, housing commitments, those sites that had permission at the time of the plan, and infill opportunities. Members will also note that there was a further site, Fishtoft 041, which is allocated as a reserve site in the local plan. The Fishtoft 046 site, the subject of this application, had an indicative number of 45 units established within the plan. So in general terms, therefore, the starting principle is considered to be appropriate. And just to clarify in terms of the relationship between the application site and the allocation, so the application site is this area here on the left image, and what we've done here is a very crude overlay. So the grey is the extent of the allocation within the local plan. So you can see there is a small element here that is outside of the allocation, and then there is a further piece here that the actual allocation extends beyond it. The access road that would lead into this site all falls within that allocation. So substantively, the proposal does, for planning purposes, fall within the allocation, and officers do consider that, as set out in the first section of page 21, from paragraph 7.2 moving to 7.9, that the principle of development is considered appropriate. Moving through in terms of the impact on the character and appearance of the area and the amenities of neighbouring properties, you'll see we've gone into a reasonable level of detail. It is an outline application, as I say, but the level of detail that we've had, particularly in terms of the site layout plan, is very consistent with a full application. So the applicant has gone to great lengths to show that the number of units can be accommodated on this site, and that the relationships would be or could be made to be appropriate. The development is predominantly, it is all comprised of 2 stories for flood risk reasons, but there will be a mix of 1.5 story and 2 story properties, with some 1.5 story properties in this area here backing onto the properties fronting Gazefield Road. There is a difference in levels between those 2 sites. However, that has been taken into account in terms of working up the indicative detail that's before us. In terms of the general layout, you'll see that is discussed on pages 22 and 23 of the report, and in general terms, officers consider that the proposals are acceptable and would be acceptable if this layout were to come forward at reserve matter stage. Overall, it is considered that there must be an acceptance that the site is going to change the character and appearance of the area as a result of that change from agricultural land to a residential development. However, that was accepted at the time of the plan being adopted and was tested through the allocation and examination process. In terms of the impact on amenity, again, we have looked at the relationships between these properties, and it has been considered in detail, although not being dealt with, matters such as scale and design not dealt with at this stage. But generally speaking, the distances are considered to be appropriate, distances ranging 5 metres at its nearest between properties and the boundaries, 10 to sort of 12 metres generally being the consistent line. And the distances between the actual properties and neighbouring properties in terms of back-to-back distances range between 15 metres to 26 metres, depending on where you are within development. Again, those matters can be considered in greater detail at the reserved matters stage, so that we can ensure things like window positions, overlooking, etc., are considered in more detail at that stage. And again, these are some sections just showing those relationships. So working from the top showing section A, which is here. So the new development on the right-hand side here, the ridge heights, sorry, the surveyed ridge heights of existing properties indicated here. Moving through section B, which is at the point of the cursor here, and then section C at the point of the cursor here. Just a couple of other things to note in terms of the layout as we move through. As I said, there is a play area that is proposed alongside the open space that has been indicated. There are these parking areas at the point of the cursor here, which are being provided both to serve the development, but would be available for wider community use as well as the adjacent facilities. And the applicants have also taken on board comments that were raised through the consultation process in terms of there's a piece of highway safety treatment here in terms of a raised table and crossing point to provide continued access for the Scout Hut. There would be footpaths on both sides of that adopted road, and there is also a proposal to incorporate the gate and fence to fence off the adjacent field to ensure that that's there for safety reasons. Just running through the final few issues. So in terms of flood risk and drainage, it is in flood zone 3, but as I say, is allocated within the local plan. A site-specific flood risk assessment has been prepared, as has a drainage strategy. That has been shared with the relevant consultees and has been discussed and refined as part of the process. It is acknowledged that infiltration may not work in this location. However, it is possible that there are alternative technical solutions, in this case, a series of attenuation pipes that would underlay these swales, and a series of crates which would be within adjacent public open space to accommodate that drainage runoff and essentially ensure that the situation is no worse than it is at present. In addition, there'd be a small French drain that would run along the boundary of the properties here that are adjacent to those in Gazefield Road. So that's shown by that dotted line, just for members' awareness. In terms of flood risk and drainage, it is therefore considered the proposals are acceptable. Moving through on to heritage matters on page 26. Again, there would have been some consideration of this in the allocation of the site for housing. But again, as we've set out there, by reason of the separation distances and the nature of the housing that is proposed, that relationship would be acceptable. And again, in terms of archaeology, that matter has been dealt with and the relevant technical consultee is satisfied. In terms of highway safety, I would just like to jump back a couple of slides just to firstly reiterate that the allocation does incorporate the land within which the access was proposed. So an access was indicated and was considered at this point here when the when the site was allocated in the local plan. So it will have been tested through that process. Notwithstanding that, the application that's before you has been reviewed by the County Council Highways Department, who have raised no objections, subject to the imposition of conditions. In terms of contributions, the application does propose 20% affordable housing, which is in line with planning policy. And you'll see that the housing strategy manager is supportive based on the need in the locality. And as I said earlier, we've got those 2 requests for contributions made by the health consultees and the education consultees, both of which the applicant is willing to provide. Finally, in terms of ecology and biodiversity, the site has been subject to survey and discussion on this particular point with the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, and subject to conditions. The recommendation is that that matter can be dealt with appropriately and a biodiversity net gain can be secured. Members will see on page 29 the summary and conclusions, which then lead into page 30 in the recommendation before you. Chairman, the recommendation is for granting of conditional permission subject to the satisfactory conclusion of a legal agreement relating to the provision of the affordable housing at 20% and the provision of the health and education contributions. The conditions are set out on pages 30 moving through to page 37, including the informatives. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gildersleeve. We have registered speakers on this item. Mr. Rowley Ashley, an objector. Mr. Clive Wicks, the applicant's agent. Fishtoft Parish Councillor Joff Williams and Councillor Judith Skinner, one of the ward members for Fishtoft. Welcome to you all. You each have up to 5 minutes in which to speak, and you'll be advised 30 seconds before your 5 minutes is up. So first, Mr. Ashley, would you like to come forward to the microphone and speak, please?
Chairman, would the screen sharing cease now so that we can see the room? Thank you.
Thank you very much. In your own time, Mr. Ashley.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Rolly Ashley. I'm a resident of Fishtoft on the Gacefield Road, and I'm here to represent the Fishtoft residents and all the objections that have been submitted against this application. And thank you again for allowing a face-to-face meeting. Much appreciated. Why we're here. The South East Lincolnshire plan has been the predominant driver for putting Fishtoft on the map for development. This has been more than 10 years in the making. It originally came around about 2010, 2011. It doesn't take into account modern requirements. Things have changed so much in 10 years. You know, green travel, broadband, mobile comms. You know, Fishtoft is a rural community. It has no infrastructure to support such things that are being put forwards that are required today in today's building. Why is there no consideration for other brownfield sites as a result? Fogarty's, the warehousing off High Street. You know, we've got the Boston barrier now that opens up new opportunities. It's not clear to the residents of Fishtoft as to why we're trying to build in the rurals when there's plenty of room in the town. New housing is meant to enhance or maintain vitality in support of local services. Take a look at Fishtoft. It doesn't have any. It's got a pub. There isn't anything else in Fishtoft. There's no shops. We're bereft of facilities, doctors, dentists, national supermarket chains. We've got mini markets, but they're for emergency. They're not value general shopping. Everything we do has to travel across an already congested A16. Everything is a vehicle movement. According to National Policy Planning Framework, rural building is only to be encouraged if homes are required for rural work. There's no employment opportunities as a result of this. There's no economic growth in Fishtoft. It's really being put out on a limb, a kind of an oasis in the desert. We talk about the drainage. I think there's a lot being said about that, and we appreciate the fact that more work has gone in since the survey was done. However, you know, on an open system land, we're less than 20 feet above sea level. The existing residents of Fishtoft are highly skeptical of this proposal, and we think a lot more work has to be done to protect us as existing residents. There are multiple failures of these systems around the country without the meticulous planning and maintenance that's needed for drainage. So we'd like to hope that a lot more is done around drainage rather than just go with a system that we've got proposed at the moment. We've already got flooding issues in the road, houses and gardens. We don't need to add to that anymore. All roads into Fishtoft do not have safe pedestrian access, path or lighting. Equally, cycling has no protection. The existing agriculture and Anglia water vehicle movements, they already make Fishtoft a dangerous conduit. Frail surface, we've got compression faults. You know, a year ago, we had a compression failure of the water mains. You know, that was no insignificance that the Haven Bank Works lorries were going up and down our road constantly, and then we get a compression failure. We're very worried about the structure of the road. The national guidelines stipulate 6.8 metre width roads for regular HGV passing. All the roads coming into Fishtoft, not just Gacefield, but Fishtoft, Clampgate, Church Green, they're barely 5.5 at best, and there's a lot of pinch points in those and with no paths. There's updates on the new proposal to make sure there's 2 metre wide footpath, you know, kind of going between the school and the entrance. What about the rest? Where's the pass? Where's the 2 metre pass down Gacefield Road to get to public transport, to the open shared space, you know, to anything, the school buses, the secondary school buses at the end? Fishtoft already has a dangerous road junction with Gacefield Road, Clampgate and Fishtoft. It's blind going north on Gacefield Road, and lorries and trucks and vehicles sweep through there. There's no inherent safety within Fishtoft to allow for an increase in vehicle movements and footfall. Again, the secondary school bus departure and arrival at the end, that's chaos in the morning. There's no safe place for pupils. Putting more houses on there to add more pupils to that is just going to make it worse. Nothing is made better by this proposal. We haven't seen a transport statement. The national policy framework requires one. We're already not safe. It says high quality walking and
30
cycling.
seconds.
Okay, thank you. There's no minimisation of vehicle journeys for employment, shopping, leisure, education. They all fail. There's no conflict protection between pedestrian, cycle and vehicle. There may be on the new site, but not in the rest of Fishtoft where you're going to increase the footfall. Pathways are in neglect. Disability access for all modes of transport. They're all failing on this transport statement. So in summary, there's been no investment in a Fishtoft strategy to prepare or support for more housing, more vehicle movements, more construction traffic, better communication, or better public transport. It is not a suitable conduit for safe travel. Please do not be oblivious to the future requirements of communication, electrical
Your time is up.
infrastructure, the dangers,
Thank
we
you,
implore you to look through a real world
Mr.
lens.
Ashley. Thank you very much for your contribution. I must stop you there.
No, that's fine. I understand.
Your 5 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wicks, would you be so kind as to come forward, please? The same applies, 5 minutes in your own time, and Jeanette will let us know when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chairman, Mel, and members. Welcome back. I'm Clive Wicks. I'm the architect for the scheme. Firstly, can I say, everybody in this room wants to do...
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Could you speak into the microphone, and I'll let you start again if we could reset the timer, please, Jeanette. If you just speak into the microphone, one or two of our councillors down this end struggle to hear unless we're speaking into the mic.
I do apologise, Chairman. Right, members, I'm Clive Wicks. I'm the architect for the scheme. Firstly, can I say everybody in this room wants to do the best they can for Fishtoft. That is, everyone who lives there, myself as a local architect, and my clients who are a long-standing, well-known farming business. We've liaised with the Scouts, the primary school, forward planners, development control, statutory consultees via PAD meetings on Zoom. And that, Chairman, is the new way forward. And I thank Ian Carrington for his chairmanship of that. Everyone has contributed to the debate, which allows houses to be largely hidden from Gazefield Road. The properties on Gazefield Road back onto the highest, safest piece of available land in Fishtoft for flood risk. So logically, this became the best piece of land for new housing, in the opinion of the forward planners, the council, and their local plan inspector at a full planning public inquiry. Every village, Chairman, has to play its part in the housing crisis. The green public open space is at the site entrance, so the view into the site is of trees and hedgerows with housing set behind. We have linked the 20 affordable houses scheme into the 46 unit scheme to achieve a housing project for all sections of society. The oval public open space is overlooked by a crescent of affordable homes, which provides subliminal security by overlooking the open space and the play areas. The 46 unit scheme incorporates 9 more affordable units. Stuart Horton, your housing officer, has been consulted from the start and has confirmed the affordable housing mix required. His previous involvement at Puritan Way, Fenside and Girls' School Lane, Butterwick, have created very proud young family residents on both schemes. And as a former deputy director at North Kesteven, I know how difficult that can be. The level of housing pride on Fenside, for instance, has been remarkable. The new residents there are now proud to tell people where they live. We designed Saxon Fields in the centre of Fishtoft several years ago, and that is the character we want here. It is an outline application before you, but with proper house footprints, so they're not going to be a row of boxes. We incorporate focal points, houses set at angles, and also create 2 small courtyard developments within the scheme. As far as ecology is concerned, we've increased the density of new hedgerows and trees to the landscape belt to provide a positive stop to the south. We have bat, sparrow and swift boxes throughout the scheme and spaces left in fencing to help the hedgehogs roam around. We are planting over 100 native trees on the site, which is just a field at the moment. The heights of the properties backing onto houses on Gazefield Road, as has been presented already, are now only 1.5 stories or chalet-style properties. There is no overlooking. Concern was raised over water runoff from the field towards those houses. This was due to the consolidation of the soil by tractors so that it absorbs no rainfall. We have therefore incorporated a French drain along the boundary, which connects to the surface water system, removing any storm water. We provide car parking for the Scouts, which doubles up, as you've heard, to parking for parents dropping off and picking up their children from school. The applicant is providing toilet facilities for Scout activities in the field, as well as secure gates and a raised pedestrian crossover. We're donating £20,000 towards the facilities of the primary school, which hopefully will be match funded by the county. The agenda confirms contributions of £30,000 to the National Health Service and £154,000 towards secondary schools. We have the support of the Scouts, the school, the County Council, Environmental Health, Anglia Water, Witham Forth, your Housing Strategy Unit, the Wildlife Trust and the EA. These proposals are supported by your local plan and are NPPF led. We are supported by policies 1 and 11 of the local plan, and the outline layout is of a quality that will make a reserved matters application fairly straightforward. Your committee have a good base to start from, Chairman. We have a full range of house types and will reflect the quality of Saxon Fields. With 1.5 stories and chalet dwellings to the rear, there is no adverse impact on the properties of Gacefield Road. We do affect their view, Chairman, though. Everyone at the PAD meetings fully engaged with the process, Chairman. Your local plan supports our proposal. We have an integrated SUD scheme, crates underlying the public open space and a French drain behind road properties. The County Council are supportive and say it follows best practice. They have no highway safety concerns. Your officers commend the considerable economic benefits that are likely to arise, and with EV power points and low energy design, the scheme is sustainable. There is an urgent need for this housing, and I believe it will provide a potentially outstanding housing layout, which when completed will provide Fishtoft and the borough with a very high quality project. I very much hope, therefore, Chairman, that your members will agree with me and support the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And by the sounds of Jeanette Ghalam, you're almost the second there. So thank you very much for that. We now have Parish Councillor Williams. If you would like to come forward, please. And likewise, 5 minutes in your own time, sir.
Great, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here as the representative of Fishtoft Parish Council, of which I am the Vice Chair. I'm therefore representing the parish as a whole and seek to reinforce the points made by Mr. Ashley and later by Mrs. Taylor. We, as the parish, are opposed to the development on this site. As far as the report goes, it's very well put together and clear, for which we are grateful, and the objections are helpfully summarised at paragraph 5.2. In priority order, I submit the following points. Firstly, access and traffic volumes. The Highways Agency assessment is not agreed. The peak load on the junction with the existing road by the Scout Hut will add both commuter traffic from the proposed estate and school traffic as they occur at a similar time of the day. The full build, considering both this and 0489, with 66 dwellings, could be adding 100 or so further vehicles to the potential flow. Paragraph 6.3, page 18 states, development should only be prevented if the residual cumulative impacts on the road network will be severe. Therefore, we believe applies. Similarly, the statement of paragraph 7.35, parent parking at the school is transient, is meaningless. All traffic is meant to be transient. As far as privacy of existing dwellings is concerned, dormer bungalows are mentioned at paragraph 7.13, and at paragraph 6.12, page 20 states dwellings have to be at least 2 stories. I'm unsure of what the ordnance datum is, but 4.66 metres in the same paragraph above that height strikes us as substantial. Paragraph 7.17 to 7.21 allude to height reduction, but assuming a dormer bungalow has sleeping accommodation on the 2nd story, complete with windows, the proposed solution has no beneficial effect in preserving the privacy of existing properties. As far as in keeping with existing character, Recommendations at paragraph 9 notes that all trees, shrubs and bushes shall be maintained by the owner or owners of the land on which they are situated, and notes that this should be for 5 years only. Nothing is noted concerning how this can or will be enforced, and 5 years appears insufficient. As far as open space maintenance is concerned, no mention is made of a maintenance arrangement, excepting that there is a loose reference within 0489. As far as use of arable land is concerned, I understand that Lincolnshire produces around 40% of the arable crop for the UK, and that most of that production is concentrated in the flatlands of South Holland and East Lindsey. We do not have sight of what brownfield sites may be available across the borough as a whole, but suggest other options need to be exhaustively explored before losing any triple Class A farmland. Scope creep. Paragraph 7.4 notes that FIS 046 has an allocation of 45 units, 46 are proposed. Infrastructure, schooling. The comments of Fishtoft Academy are noted together with provision of 154,000 for further education. It is assumed that this is going to be added to the council tax precept for future residents. Services, no mention is made of the impact on demand at local grocery and fuel outlets. It is assumed that a presumption that existing businesses outside the village will absorb this. Medical, whilst the clinical commissioning group request of £30,000 is noted, the practical impact on primary care provision of possibly an additional 150 to 250 people has not been addressed. Our reservations with respect to flood risk and the archaeological impact remain. In summary, we would wish to see detailed layout plans for further comment if this proposal is allowed to proceed. Thank you, and I'm happy to submit these notes if that would be of assistance to the clerk.
Thank you very much. There's no need for that, but your contribution verbally is sufficient. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And finally, we have Councillor Judith Skinner, who is one of the borough councillors for Fishtoft. And again, Councillor Skinner, you have 5 minutes in your own time, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Judith Skinner. I'm one of the ward councillors for Fishtoft. Talking about B200488, this development is contrary to the aims of sustainable development, of which seek to avoid a pattern of development which leads to reliance on the private motor car. The residents of the new development will have little choice but to use a car. The village has limited local services, a church, pub and small primary school that are within walking distance. There is a limited bus service, however, it is not extensive enough to be used to travel to work, a doctor's appointment or leisure activities such as an evening out at the cinema or theatre, or to get your child to after school activities. It is also run by a private company who are continually assessing the viability of its services, so it could be withdrawn at any time. This should be taken into consideration as it was weighted against a previous application, B150404, land off Clumpgate Road. Nothing has been added to the village services since then. The proposed development has brought forward an unprecedented number of objections from residents, and for those living on Gatesville Road, a huge issue is the risk of their properties suffering worse flooding conditions than already happens when it rains. The field is mostly soil of a clay type which does not give good drainage, and it is higher than the properties of Gatesville Road. Water always finds the easiest route to drain. I am concerned that plans to put in an attenuation pond will not mitigate or ensure the residents are adversely affected by the development. The water will not drain away. I have noted that they intend to pipe it away. However, the watercourse they intend to use, I am informed, is already at capacity and drains through more clay soil. There are also concern of who is going to maintain the drainage in the long term, and I would urge you, if you are minded to vote for this application, that a condition is added that a management committee be set up to do this. Vehicular access to the development is unsatisfactory. It is adjacent to the Scout Hut, limiting their access to a field they have use of. I know they are not happy with this situation, as I spoke to them just the other night. The 6 parking spaces given to them are insufficient, and knowing human nature will not be used by parents dropping off their children, or especially at pick-up time when they all arrive together. 6 is inadequate. You can clearly see from the photo I have provided, which is a closer up shot than used in the presentation. This is the traffic at school pickup time. Parents park up early on the roadside, school car park for staff only. The vehicles extend up to the junction with Scalp Cut Road. They also use the front of the Scouters, as can be seen by the white car just near the trees, which is where the access road is. Any vehicle coming out and wanting to get past, any vehicle coming down the road and wanting to get past has to mount the pavement outside the school. The school is in process of building a school hall, which I applaud, but there is going to be for community use, which will mean more parked cars at different times of the day. In fact, around 10 years ago, an ambulance was prevented from getting to an emergency call down Scalp Road, and it will never be known if that delay was contributed to the fatality that happened. As the development has only one way in and one way out, is it possible that this could be repeated? The road is not built to take the extra volume of traffic that the proposed development would generate. I wonder if LCC have been to view this site, as if they had, I am sure they would have concerns. On paper, it may look feasible. I suggest that members take a look at the site via visit in September when the school returns for themselves to see the situation. It is obvious that quite a number of 60-foot conifers are going to be felled to create this access. The remaining ones will possibly block the view of oncoming traffic at the junction. I bring members' attention to point 6.5 on page 19. Anglian Water comment that foul water drainage is in the catchment area Fishtoft Recycling Centre, which has capacity. The fact is that the foul water for the village is pumped to Freeston via a station near the old post office at the top of Gaysfield Road. I would ask members to question the report by Anglian Water and to seek clarification on this. The proposal on the living conditions of local residents is of concern. Gaysfield Road and Marshall Close residents currently enjoy open aspects will be largely lost. I put to you that the development of the site will result in an unneighbourly juxtaposition. Properties on Gaysfield Road are mostly bungalows with the development proposal for houses built up against them. Whilst I am pleased to see trees and green spaces provided for in the development, this is the policy of Fishtoft Parish Council not to take on maintenance of any new green spaces in the parish. If you are minded to vote for this application, please consider the clause of a management committee to be set up to maintain them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. Do members of the committee have any questions that they'd like to ask of any of the four speakers we have just heard? Seeing no one, thank you. I will invite members of the committee to commence with the debate, unless there's any points, Mr. Gildersleeve, that you'd like to pick up at this stage. Thank you. I would just give a little bit of a view, having read the papers and having heard the speakers. This is mostly a site which already has planning permission in principle as an allocated site in the South East Lincolnshire local plan. And although we have heard suggestions that that plan is out of date, having been begun 10 years ago, that plan was adopted by the council, if my memory serves me right, 2 to 3 years ago. Because we have an up-to-date housing supply, because we are meeting our housing delivery tests, then in policy terms, that plan remains up to date. It is the latest plan and it remains in conformity on its obligations. So we can't, I would just caution members on that point that we do have an up-to-date local plan, and this application covers a substantial part and a little bit more of a site which has which is allocated under that plan. But I will open it up to debate. Councillor Austin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The first point I made was that the local plan is not out of date. It theoretically was started in 2010, but in my declarations, you'll know I was a member of the plan, and that went back to scratch. And I didn't become a member of that group until after I was elected to the county council in 2013. Therefore, I know for sure that what was stated is not accurate. And in fact, by the time we finished, was it was continually being updated as the government changed its requirement for housing allocations. So I want that one to be put to bed, please, for good. Right. This is one of the first times I think I've ever met an outline application like this. It hasn't got the access specified. I don't know if Mr. Gildersleeve would like to comment on that afterwards, but I'm very, very surprised that that is a reserved matter. Other than that, right, Ordnance OD is relatively good for this area, and to the best of my knowledge, although people talk about flooding gardens, I don't think there are any records of internal flooding to properties in that part of the parish. It would be very nice, I know, if you live in a settlement on the edge of Boston, as this particular site is, if time could stand still and you could stay in your nice little environment forever. However, look at it another way. Development brings the potential of more services. And that it also means that, you know, why shouldn't other people enjoy the services that you get elsewhere? But you're not going to get the services without the development. Right, we've had comment on agricultural land. A lot of the Borough of Boston contains land that is just as good as in South Holland or East Lindsey. But we've had a bit of a contradiction, because at one speaker talked about clay, and then elsewhere it talks about best grade agricultural land. So perhaps that's something else that could be taken up. At this stage, then, I'm not going to make any further comments, but there's just these few discrepancies between what's been stated, and I'd be grateful if Mr. Gildersleeve could perhaps throw some light on some of these matters. Thank you.
Mr. Gildersleeve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just coming back on the point around the access. Yes, it's unusual for us to have an outline where at least one of the reserved matters, generally the access isn't fixed, but that's quite within the applicant's right. You know, we are here to determine the application that is put before us. What I would say is we are dealing with the extent of the red line, which identifies where the access is then going to go. So albeit access is a reserved matter, it is pretty much fixed in terms of where it would end up coming as a reserved matters, because the reserved matters would have to be in conformity with the red line of the outline that's before you. As I say, taking it one stage further, as I said in my presentation, and as Mr. Wicks has said, the scheme has been worked up in a large amount of detail for an outline application. Members will be very aware of outline applications in the classic format, where somebody just puts a red line round a field and that's all they provide. This has got a lot of detail with it. It has a lot of technical information with it. And that is in part to satisfy Ian, to enable him to present the recommendation that he has put forward, but also to satisfy the relevant technical consultees. So, yeah, it's a bit of an unusual one, but that shouldn't stop us determining what's before us. Picking up on your point about flooding, even if there were records of neighbouring land being flooded, that wouldn't, to say, preclude this development from being developed. as members will have heard me say many times, there is always a technical solution. The general principle is to leave it no worse than it is at the moment. And if you can deliver some betterment, well, what we have here is a scheme that incorporates a French drain around the boundary that would then feed into that SUD system, and has been subject to considerable discussion with Ian and the relevant technical consultees. Given that situation, we have no technical objections in relation to flooding or drainage, and that's the position that is before you. I think one of the speakers referenced the raising of the land and the question marks around the 4 point, I believe it's the ODN that's referenced in the report. Bear with me, let me just find the reference. That's going to elude me now. Sorry about that. It's in the conditions, actually. That is an Environment Agency recommendation, and that is based around the flood risk assessment that has been provided. Bear with me. Yep, so it's condition number 11, which says that finished floor levels to be set a minimum of 4.66 metres above ordnance datum. Looking at the flood risk assessment, that's in effect the floor levels being 300 millimetres on average above the existing ground level. So it is not significant when we're considering some of the other sites that we have in the borough where we've dealt with land raising of in excess of a metre. So it is relatively low scale. Finally, on your point around agricultural land, yes, it's agricultural land. Yes, it may be reasonable quality, but I come back to the starting point that the site has, for the most part, been allocated within the local plan. As members will know, when we go through a plan making exercise and also in development management terms, you often get these policies that pull and push against each other. And this is one of those circumstances. The Borough Council, in adopting the local plan, has considered the principle of housing on that site. So frankly, it would be unreasonable of us to now raise an objection to the scheme on the grounds of loss of agricultural land, because that should have been considered in detail and was considered in detail when we went through the allocations exercise. So I'd like to put that matter to bed, if I may, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gildersleeve. The other thing that I think is quite, as I think you referenced earlier on in your reply to Councillor Austin, it is quite unusual and in a way pleasingly so that we have the amount of detail that we have here on an outline. And I understand that it is, to quote, only outline, but we have a condition on page 30, condition 1, that when it comes back, no development shall commence until details, access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale have been submitted, but those details shall conform to the design principles and layout shown in the approved indicative drawing. So with that condition, we have a certain degree of confidence that the application, when it does come back to those reserved matters, will look very similar to what we see on the indicative map at the moment. Very interested to note the raising of floor levels of land levels by 300 millimetres. The ward that I represent includes Old Leek, and if you go past the housing that's there next to the co-op shop on the main road, the land there had to be raised significantly more than this. And my basic understanding here is that Fishtoft is effectively, and has been for a very, very long time, something of a hill. That's why the settlement is there, why the settlement has been there for as many years as what it has. And I hear loud and clear the points that have been made by Mr. Gildersleeve, that the principle of development, whilst I equally understand the concerns of local residents, representing, as I do, communities that feel the pressure of development, feel the pressure of housing, that feel the pressure of that change. That principle has already been determined, and we would have grave difficulty as a planning authority or as a committee defending a decision that sought to revisit that principle that's established in the local plan. I have Councillor Chalmers and Councillor Stephen, sorry. Councillor Chalmers, please.
Thank you. Well, I've got can you hear me all right? I've got a couple of points to make. Mr. Ashley, he's gone. All right. Well, I thought his speech was actually quite well put, and he mentioned that there is no pavement in and out, and knowing that area quite well, there are no pavements in and out. Do we have any plans to increase pedestrian or cyclist safety within that area with the growth of Fishtoft, which, Mr. Wilkes, I thought that the architecture was quite beautiful and in keeping with Fishtoft.
Chalmers, I'm sorry, could you address the committee and the microphone?
So, well, so I thought that actually the architecture met the upkeep of the area. We do need growth, and it is a nice looking plan that has been put in place. But yeah, Mr. Ashley commented on the lack of pavements around the area, and I wondered, as a planning committee, whether we had any plans to increase the road safety.
Thank you, Councillor Chalmers. There is no plan within this proposal to increase the number, size, scale, location of any off-site linkages. It comes down to whether or not those are reasonable and necessary for this application. And the advice that we've received, in line with the application that's before you, in line with the work that was done as part of the South East Lincolnshire local plan, is that there is no requirement for that that would be reasonable or justifiable against this development. There is a small element, which is the highway improvement works, which is referenced in the report, to do some work immediately adjacent to the access. And I'm just going to find the condition. It is condition number 12, which talks about the provision of that footway link onto Gazefield Road, and that we would secure the details for that, so that is the ability for people to connect from this development to Gazefield Road and the immediate surroundings thereon. And obviously there is a footway on part of Gazefield Road already, running adjacent to the school, that allows you to get down to the centre of the village. So, as I say, that's the position that we're in.
Does that answer your queries, Councillor Chalmers? Thank you. Councillor Stevens, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Having listened to all the debate, and the fact that this site is allocated in the local plan, and also what Mr. Wick said, he's given me confidence that the properties on Gazefield Road won't be overlooked. I live in a similar area where I've got properties to the back of me and I'm not overlooked, and it doesn't impede on my privacy or my lifestyle. I suppose one might say it's always better if it's not in my backyard, but I think this plan is lovely and I'm going to support it, and I will move it to be with the conditional permissions that is recommended, because the road is also taken into account in the conditions. So I would move it that we grant this, and I'd look for a seconder. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bedford, I think your hand will help just slightly quicker than Councillor Chalmers.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, well, quite a few points, obviously. I chaired the local plan along with the South Holland chairman. We alternated it during its being put together. And we didn't adopt it till 2019, which was after I'd finished as chairman. So there is no way can we as a borough council, if this was refused, defend it. And the developer would really have the right to go for costs and everything else. We couldn't defend it. Fishtoft Parish Council and their members, and I don't know how many are still around that was there at the time, but Trevor Thompson, Peter Rudy, Simon Eldred did tours of village halls presenting these plans all over the place. and there was no objection to it. If they wanted to object, that was the time to object, not now it's actually coming forward. There are many things on here, on their objections, that, yes, you can turn around and say they are correct, but so is every village within the borough of Boston have the same sort of problems. And Fishtoft do have one or two nice points. They've got a 10-pin bowling alley, they've got play towers, they've got the playing field. That's all in Fishtoft. And the need for housing on the east side, if you look at the main employers these days in Boston Borough, they are on the eastern side of Boston. You've got Clements, you've got Staples, you've got Sauls, you've got Leggett's, and on the periphery you've got Lentons. Large employers, name others on the other side of Boston, and you'll have a job to find them. As far as drainage is concerned, the Hobhole drain is below ground level. If you look at the Witham, the Steeping and so on, where flooding has happened, it's raised embankments. The Hobhole is right below, and it has the largest pumping station within a mile of this site, probably in Boston Borough Council area. And so I will happily second it, because I do not see how we could ever defend this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bedford. Councillor Chalmers, please.
I wanted to second Councillor Stevens' proposal.
Thank you. Do I have any other speakers? Councillor Noble, please.
Thank you, Chair. Like most planning applications, there are positives and negatives. So let's look at the positives first. As regards the DPH dwellings per hectare, it's very low at 16, so that's perfectly acceptable. There's a housing mix, 20% of affordable housing, and we know the borough's in dire need of more affordable housing. The separation distances seem to be adequate. There was talk of between 15 metres and 26 metres. I think normally it's 20, 22 is the average, so I'm sure that can be addressed. The drainage issues are obviously a big concern for local residents, people living on Clampgate Road, Gatesfield Road, obviously have experienced difficulties there. But there is a flood risk assessment, and it's been submitted and it meets the requirements of the NPPF. It is an allocated site within the SELP. There has been some attempt to alter the original or amend the original plans. For example, bungalows with dormer windows, 1.5 stories high, as proposed on the western edge of the development. There have been alterations to the height, the fenestration and the orientation of some of the buildings. I couldn't see from where I'm sitting the actual design of the property, so if I missed that, I'm sorry, but it's pretty difficult to see some of the detail from way back here. There is going to be a play area, and there are going to be footpaths on both sides of the adopted road. And we learned that the finished floor levels are going to be 300 metres above ground level. So all those are positives. Now let's look at the negatives. First of all, it is a classic case of tandem backland development. There's obviously going to be an impact on neighbourhood amenity. If I go to page 24, and I quote from the report, there is no doubt the development will have an impact on residents bordering the site. There will be in future an urbanised prospect of domestic housing. And Mr. Gildersleeves made a comment in his presentation. He said, the application will change the character and appearance of the area. Now, despite dire warnings, we hear people saying this is indefensible if we go and so on. It carries absolutely no weight with me because there are valid policy objections, which I'll come to in a minute. Let's go on. Right, lack of amenities is a valid point. Fishtoft is a very, very large ward, but in this particular part of Fishtoft, there is no shop, there is no doctor's surgery. It has no amenities really. The public transport for provision for Fishtoft is incredibly poor. Not very frequent bus service, and it's only a sustainable location if one has a car. Right, what else? The NPPF. We saw from the photograph that it's actually prime agricultural land. And I'm going to read from the NPPF 11.2, quote, Where significant development of agricultural land is demonstrated to be necessary, local planning authorities should seek to use areas of poorer quality land in preference to that of higher quality. The fact is, there are lots of planning application sites being put in around Fishtoft. Some are eminently more suitable. We have 2 developments either side of Toot Lane for a lot of housing. We have 45 about affordable houses being built at Old Corn Green. There's another one in the pipeline for further affordable housing. So every application is determined really on its own merits. So my objections are based on policy 2, where it talks about a sustainable development consideration not being met if the character and appearance of the area is going to be fundamentally changed. That is very clear in this case. There's going to be a degree of urbanisation. There's going to be an unacceptable massing of housing. And of course, it's an outline application, but we know very well that subsequently many more houses could be developed on that site. But I know we have to determine each application on its own merits. So I object on policy development management, that's 2.1. And obviously there's going to be an element of visual intrusion, which is policy 2.6. And then also if we go to policy 3, design of new development, it talks about, again, massing of neighbouring buildings in the surrounding area. So for all those reasons, I cannot possibly support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. Do I have, go Mr. Gill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to respond to a couple of points, and I won't go over ground that we've already covered. In terms of the design, Councillor Noble, that is for later consideration. That is to be dealt with at the reserved matter stage. In terms of the point about tandem and backland development, I know members of this committee, members generally, and the public have differing views about tandem and backland development. Tandem and backland development of itself is not necessarily harmful. It is about looking at it in its context within which it would sit. And coming on to the point about the character, I did reference that it is going to change, but members will have heard me say my favourite inspector's phrase, change of itself is not necessarily harmful. We have, as a local planning authority, when we adopted the plan, adopted an allocation on this site, and therefore we have accepted the principle that that piece of land will change in terms of its character. In terms of the relationships with neighbouring properties, I think we must read paragraph 7.19 in the context within which it's written, in the sense that it is saying those properties fronting Gazefield Road may have a lovely view out over those fields at the moment. However, in allocating this site, we have accepted that will change. And there is no right to a view. You know, that loss of view does not necessarily mean there'll be a detrimental impact on amenity. When we come to look at the amenity at the more detailed stage, we will be looking at window positions, we'll be looking at the distances. Distances, yes, are typically 20 metres back to back. However, it can be shorter than that, it can be longer than that. It all depends on where the windows are positioned, what changes in ground level there are likely to be, etc. We've got a detailed level of information that's enabled us to make an informed view that actually you can get a scheme on this site that is acceptable in terms of the amenities of those properties. And I won't delay too long, but I will just bring up the section, bear with me, which again shows that sort of situation. So this is the level of detail that we would start to expect at a reserved matter stage, but what they've shown here is the scale of one of the proposed properties. I believe that's plot 3 here, and you can see that is a property to be serviced by dormer roof lights at the point of the cursor, and you can see the relative height of a person. Now that is purely for indicative purposes at this stage, but it hopefully gives members confidence that that relationship, when it comes up at the reserved matter stage, is something that we can look at in greater detail. The final thing I would say is that when we are talking about the NPPF and the point about agricultural land, I will just reiterate the NPPF is a material consideration. It doesn't change the starting point for decision making, which is the local plan. And actually the NPPF actually goes on to reaffirm that point to say that proposals that are in conformity with the local plan should be approved without delay. So I just make that point to just clarify that the matter of agricultural land has as I said earlier, been dealt with when we allocated the site. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gildersleeve. Councillor Skinner, please.
Thank you very much. Still not, one of the panel did actually ask something to be clarified, and that was the Anglian Water report said it was fished off catchment. It certainly isn't. It actually goes to Freeston. So there is some major inaccuracies within this report. Generally, this applicant actually gives us some very good reports. And there's two things that really bother me on this. It's not the fact that it's allocated, because it is allocated. Where the road junction comes out is absolutely grade A stupid as far as I'm concerned. It has no need to come up there, because it could be moved further down to be more sympathetic. Some of us have to live with going by the school every day, and we know how, like every other school, it backs up. But to actually introduce a road junction halfway through it is, you know, there was something somebody said about whatever we do, it should be better. I'm afraid I can't support this because it's not better, but the layout is good.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. Mr. Gildersleeve, then Councillor Bedford, please.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. In terms of the Anglian Water response, that is the formal response that we've got from them as a statutory consultee. It says that the foul drainage is in the catchment of Fishtoft Water Recycling Centre, and that will have available capacity for these flows. So where the report that's before you is based on the factual information that statutory consultee has provided. That said, as members will note from other applications, the requirement to connect to the foul sewerage network also requires agreement with that statutory body through Section 104 of the Water Industry Act. So again, that's a technical matter that's covered by separate legislation as well as planning. So at that stage, Anglian Water would have the ability to reassess the capacity within their network and require the developer to do whatever works are necessary under Section 104 of the Act, and they have greater powers than we do under the Water Industry Act in terms of requiring both on and off-site improvements should they be required. So all I can give you is there may be disagreement. I can neither confirm or deny the version of events that's been put forward by yourself, Councillor Skinner, and the Speaker. We've acted based upon the advice that's been given to us by Anglian Water as the technical consultee. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Bedford, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, it was the same point I was going to come back to. There is no Anglian Water facilities in Freeston. The only other pumping station or treatment works is actually in Fishtoft, off Wise Lane. It is not in Freeston. The Hobble is the dividing line. And so, you know, there's nothing in, I've lived there a long while and I haven't seen anything in Freeston yet.
Councillor Skinner, please.
Point of order, Chairman. If you look up on the internet, it places the Fishtoft Recycling Centre as down the bottom of Scalp Road. The other one, it can be called what it likes, but it's not the one mentioned in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Just if I can clarify with Mr. Gildersleeve that the committee can have a degree of confidence that wherever the connection ultimately goes to, Anglian Water will have to confirm that they have that capacity before anything is built, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I said earlier, we have double control in effect. So we've got condition 8 that is on page 33. Which requires submissions of reserved matters to be accompanied by full details of the proposed foul water drainage system, including connection points to the public sewer discharge rates, etc. And then beyond that, the applicant is required to seek agreement and authorisation from Anglian Water as the statutory body under the Water Industry Act. So I would hope that gives members complete confidence, and that is very similar to many other sites that we've dealt with.
Thank you. I have Councillor Wellborn, please.
Thank you, Chair. On principle, we do have to go with the plan. I have great sympathy for the people of Fishtoft. I know the area. I know how difficult it is when school's leaving. I know that where the scout hut comes, I've pulled in there quite a few times for to drop things off for them. But we can't really say, no, we can't do it, because it's not, as a planning committee, it comes within our remit. The only thing I ask is when it does come forward that they move the entrance to the area. It's totally in the wrong place. I so agree, Councillor Skinner. But unfortunately, I have great sympathy with the whole of the village on this. I live in a small village, and I know that we could end up with these sort of things. We don't have any amenities either, but it's the way that things are going to go. So I'm still split. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just pick up a point there before Mr. Gildersleeve comes back. We have condition 1, which suggests that reserved matters effectively conform to the layout shown. If, in order to comply with condition 12, which is the access and layout of that, I'm assuming that if it isn't possible to satisfy highways, that access is in fact safe at its current location, that would be picked up at a future point and form part of either another application or reserve matters itself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In simple terms, yes. However, the more complicated answer is no. We've got condition 12 there that is to deal with the access and the relationship in terms of the public footway link that is proposed. What we have, and I will just jump to screen sharing, is an access that is located, bear with me so you can see it a bit more clearly. So this is the allocation. The access is located within the area of the allocation. So in allocating all of the sites, they will have been assessed by highways at that point in time in terms of the principle of development and the number of units that are proposed. Then we jump to the scheme, and I'll find a good plan. The access is within the red line. The red line dictates the extent of the outline application. So if we take, just as a hypothetical, the applicant has heard what Councillor Skinner and others have said today and actually says, you know what, I'm going to put it down here past the old chapel. That would not be able to be done as part of this outline application. It would have to come in as part of a separate application, and ultimately looking at this layout would result in quite a considerable redesign. That said, that may come forward, that does happen. But in terms of the outline that we have here, a reserved matters, which includes access, would have to be in conformity with the red line identified as part of the application plan. So as I come back to my earlier point, yes, the details for the access are indicative, but you can see there that that's an adopted road layout with a footway on either side. It's got visibility splays. It has been worked up in a reasonable amount of detail to enable the highway authority to comment. So they will have had that detail before them. They have not raised an objection to that access in that location. So that is what we're bound by. But as I say, that doesn't stop the applicant coming forward with another scheme, but that would have to be determined on its own merits as a separate application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Austin, please.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. Is it, can we, as part of our consent, if we do give consent, to ask that once we get into the reserved matters, that it comes back to committee? That's my first question, because often once we've given the outline permission, then they don't. But because of the matter with the exact access, that is something that I wonder whether might be appropriate. And there's been a lot of talk about Anglian water. I think we need certainly this confusion over which I myself have found over the years that what I think is the Fishtoft one is not the Fishtoft. It's the Boston one, I'm told, and that the one nearer Boston is the Fishtoft one. So can we get it quite clear which Anglian water facility they are talking about? Finally, one thing that always seems to come up over and over again, there's the odd councillor who does seem to have an obsession about backland. To me, backland is when you probably literally push an entrance between probably two properties and build a property either in the back garden or immediately. This is in a village, and a village has streets, and streets are obviously behind each other. Unless we live in, say, Deeping St Nicholas, which is pretty well linear, there's always something behind something else in a village. So, you know, either you live in a village or you don't live in a village, but you're going to have houses behind each other. Right, that is not a planning matter as such. It is just a misuse of the term backland, in my opinion. Yes, I shall be supporting this, but I would certainly be happier if we could insist that the reserved matters come back to committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Mr. Gildersleeve, then Councillor Noble, and then, unless anyone has anything new to say, I feel we've given this a fairly good debate. Mr. Gildersleeve, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Austin, you'll be aware of circumstances where this committee has in the past made that recommendation that a reserved matters or a subsequent matter comes before the committee. However, I would issue a word of caution with that as an approach, that really we should be considering the application on its own merits at that point in time when it comes forward. So to set that precedent now can lead to an undue expectation. And so therefore I would always say, actually, there is no reason for that to be the case. And you know, we would determine any reserved matters in the usual process. You know, why should we deviate from what is our process on 99% of our applications to set you know, an expectation with this application? In terms of the matter about whether it's Fishtoft, whether it's Freeston, whether it's Boston wastewater treatment works, I can only give you the answer that the technical consultee has provided in their formal consultation response. That is, as I've said earlier, irrespective of that and what it is called and where it is going, that doesn't change the recommendation of the report that's before you. Because as I said earlier, even if, you know, in the time period that may pass in between this actual development happening, Anglian Water could require the developer to direct those flows to another location, and that would be done under the Water Industry Act. So it doesn't change the recommendation at all that's before us. So I see no reason to delay or withhold a decision that we need to make today, really.
Thank you. May I just respond, if you like? The ward member still always has the ultimate right to ask for it to come to committee. So, you know, I accept that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. I'll go to Councillor Brown first, because he hasn't actually spoken yet. So go for it, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To endorse what Councillor Bedford said earlier, I served on the South East Lincolnshire local plan under his chairmanship, and he is quite right by saying that this was adopted in March 2019, and it is indeed up to date. This went through a very long process to adopt. It took years, actually, and there were several consultations in local village halls where it was clearly on display what allotments were going to be added. And this particular one, I mean, it's recognised as a minor service settlement. I appreciate there are concerns with the likes of access and drainage issues, but I'd remind members of the committee the problems that we had with an application before along Middlegate Road, Frampton, which was basically argued against because of the road infrastructure and drainage issues, which went to a public appeal and was upheld. And as Councillor Bedford said, we've got no real defence to refuse this because it is an allocated site ratified by the South East Lincolnshire Local Plan, and we would find it very, very difficult to defend that decision. So I sympathise with the people of Fishtoft. They obviously don't want any more development in their area, but as the plan dictates, every village and minor or major settlement area has to take its allocation of building development. I also agree with, I think it was Councillor Austin that said that when you increase the size of a village, you encourage services to go to that village. I'm mindful of another application in a small village of 200 houses being built, and we understand that the co-op is interested in locating there. So with development, you naturally attach greater services to come to that settlement. So there we are. That's all I've got to say. And I've got to support this because of the set out of what we've got here in the South East Lincolnshire Local Plan. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Noble, and then we're going to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm glad Mr. Gilsley's raised the issue of point 719 on page 24, because we all know no one has a right to a view, and I wasn't asserting or alleging that, but I did refer to the point of an unacceptable degree of massing. Now, the application is for 46 dwellings. According to the SELP, there's only supposed to be 5 put on there. It's an outline plan, so one can probably quite confidently look forward to many more houses eventually being built there. So my objection to that is on the grounds of an acceptable degree of massing. And Councillor Austin was talking about backland development being a feature. Well, I think Councillor Austin, that is incorrect, because in the past we have had instances of tandem and backland development. It has been a material consideration when we come to the talk of character and appearance. And as you said, Mr. Gildersleeve, or sorry, as Mr. Gildersleeve has said, character and appearance of the village will change as a result of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. I feel we have given this sufficient debate and heard from almost all members. We have it moved by Councillor Stevens, seconded by Councillor Bedford, that the planning permission be granted in line with officer recommendation and in accordance with the conditions set out on pages 30 through and 30 to 37 of our papers. I'm assuming Jeanette can see us clearly, so those in favour of that, please show now.
Thank you, Chairman. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hands, I believe, if anyone wants to confirm.
8.
8. Thank you, Chairman.
And those against?
That's 2, Chairman, so that's clearly carried.
Thank you, Jeanette, and thank you, colleagues. And thank you, Councillor Stevens. We will just take we will take until 11:40 for a short break before we move on to the next item. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If we can retake your seats, we will press on. Jeanette, are we good to go live, please?
Yes, we are streaming live now, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jeanette, and welcome back. Our second item of business today is application B20-0489. But we do have speakers on this one. But first of all, I will hand over to Mr. Gildersleeve, who will present the report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just pull that up. So the application before you members is for a proposed residential development of 20 affordable dwellings and associated works. It is a full application and the report commences on page 43. And the application is described and the location is described as before you on screen. Members will be familiar with this slide from the last application, so I won't dwell on it too much, other than to say that for locational purposes, the exception site that is before us is broadly speaking at the point of the cursor here. Again, for illustrative purposes, this shows the exception site here and the extent of it outlined in red. And this is it in site location plan. So you can see that crescent shape of properties, principally made up of semi-detached properties served off a spine road that would be adopted in part, and then two sets of terraces at the point of the cursor here. The access road is here. It is in full detail. It is in the exact same location as the application that you've just determined, but it is designed up in full detail as part of this submission. And you can see that leading through into the development. This area here would be a central piece of open space. I won't dwell on all the slides from before in terms of location. You'll have seen that as you enter the site. Effectively, the site is on the right-hand side. So this is looking out towards the Hobhole Bank. And again, looking here, and you can see some stables that are further down the road. You can see that boundary hedge of Leylandii hedging that we referred to earlier. And again, for locational purposes, that is that boundary feature here of those Leylandii trees. So we are talking about an area that's on this side of the site, as opposed to the outline, which we were talking about being over here at the point of the cursor. As described on page 44, the application is for 20 affordable dwellings and the associated works. It is presented in full detail, comprised of 14 semi-detached houses and 2 short terraces of 3. They will be around that access road as I described earlier, with this central open space feature. And there is a proposed buffer landscaping strip that would be around the outside of the development on the eastern side, identified by the point of the cursor. The application is accompanied by various reports, and as we move through, you will see that the units are proposed to be of a relatively traditional design, robust materials of brickwork under tiled roofing, with various details, including chimneys, band courses, plinth courses, and header and sill details. So just running in reverse order, these are units 19 and 20, units 17 and 18, 15 and 16, 11 and 12. These are 9 and 10 and 10 and 14, 10 to 14, plots 7 and 8, 4 to 6 is one of those terraces, and 1 to 3 is one of those terraces. Consultation responses are set out from section 5 of the report. You'll see the 77 letters of objection. I draw members' attention to a correction in the addendum paper that was circulated. That should actually be 80, but the issues raised are the same as published in the report, so there is no change there. And in terms of, you'll see the comments of the adjacent primary school as per the previous application. Consultee responses are identical to the previous application that you've had before you this morning. So an objection from Fishtoft Parish Council, but no objections from any of the other statutory bodies. Key issues, again, consistent with the previous application. But as I say, the starting point with this one is it is a full application, and the application is proposed as a rural exception site. So I draw members' particular attention to policy 19 of the local plan. In terms of the principle of development, you will see on pages 50 through to 52, there are clearly factors that are balanced in this matter. Obviously, Fishtoft is a minor service centre, as we've discussed before. Principally, it's located, limited to allocations, the commitments and those infill opportunities. However, policy 19 does allow for development to come forward as a rural exception site. In terms of the relationship between the site and the allocation, this is the site we're dealing with as part of this application here, so that crescent shape. The site here is that outline application that we've previously discussed. So we're looking at this element here, and you will see that there is a strip here, which is principally the access road, and this feature through here that is within the allocation, but the predominant part of that is outside of the allocation. And therefore, the starting position is in relation to policy 19 as a rural exception site. In overall terms, officers do consider that the principle of development is acceptable. It is considered that there is a strong need for affordable housing, as confirmed by the council's housing manager. And in particular, when we look at the housing register, there are 38 people or families on there from Fishtoft village, 68 from the wider parish. And if you take the adjacent parish of Freeston, there's another 33. So that does, from an officer perspective, confirm that there is an extremely strong need for affordable housing. It is, as members will know, our greatest need on a borough-wide basis. And this development of 20 units would contribute to that in a positive fashion. In terms of the other criteria within policy 19, it is considered that the scale of development is in keeping with the character and appearance of the settlement and the overall scale. And we'll come on to that later on in the report. There is one minor failing in terms of the pre-application consultation with the community, criteria 3. And however, that has been done predominantly through the authority and through the application process. As set out at 7.8 of the report before you, failure to comply with one criteria or part of a criteria does not necessarily mean that development is unacceptable. It's one factor that we have to weigh up in the overall planning balance. So given the overall strong need for affordable housing, officers do consider the principle is acceptable. In terms of the impact on the design on the local character, officers consider it's a high quality layout. It's got good open space, good opportunities for landscaping. The units themselves are quite pleasantly designed and would fit into that context quite nicely. And they would also complement the adjacent site that we've previously discussed in terms of outline. So it is considered that the proposals would accord with both local and national planning policies. In terms of neighbouring amenity, there is none that would be affected by this particular proposal, given the separation distances to neighbouring properties. And as I say, it has been designed taking into account the indicative layout of the outline scheme that we've previously discussed. Flood risk matters are set out on page 54 leading into 55. And once again, we have no objection from any of the statutory consultees, and the scheme has been designed to take into account those factors. In terms of heritage, again, there are significant separation distances to St Guthlax Church and Fishtoft Manor. There would be the intervening site that is the allocation in between the two sites. So there is no concerns there from an officer perspective. And the archaeology was also covered off. In highways terms, as with the previous application you've discussed this morning, highways raise no objections and are comfortable that this site can accommodate the development that is proposed and that the access is appropriate and that it can work in combination with the adjacent site. And again, what I would reaffirm is that as part of this application, we've got that raised table and we've also got that fencing and gate offer here that would secure the access for all the scouts principally across that road and into their fields. And then moving on to ecology and biodiversity, again, Considerable level of detail has been presented, and there's no reason to suggest that net gain cannot be achieved. So the summary is on page 58. The key matter that officers would like to get across is that this is a rural exception site. There is a strong need for affordable housing, and therefore we believe that supports the principle of development in this instance. The conditions that are set out are pretty self-explanatory, covering archaeology, covering construction management, landscaping, drainage matters, etc. And in addition to that, we would require a Section 106 agreement to be entered into before we granted planning permission. So the recommendation before you, members, is one of conditional permission relating to that Section 106 to secure the 100% affordable housing, as well as the health and education contributions as set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gildersleeve. Again, we have registered speakers on this item. Mrs. Linda Taylor, an objection. Welcome, an objector. Welcome to you. We also have Mr. Wicks as the applicant's agent, and Fishtoft Parish Councillor, Councillor Williams. Unfortunately, Councillor Judith Skinner has had to leave for a prior appointment. However, she has left her what she was intending to say with Mrs. Bush, the Democratic Services Manager, who will very kindly present what she was intending to say at that point. So firstly, Mr. Taylor, if you would like to come forward to speak, please. Mrs. Taylor, sorry. And as with the other speakers, you have 5 minutes in your own time, and that Jeanette will notify you when you've got 30 seconds left, so in your own time.
First of all, can everybody and members of the committee hear me? Yes? Good. I'm sorry? Down. Yes. How's that? Okay, we'll do. How about that? Is that okay? Thank you. Yes? Thank you. Being 5'1.5", it's. I'm so sorry. I'd sooner look at my address, actually, Councillor. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. My name is Linda Taylor. I actually live in Gazefield Road, which obviously, as you know, directly abuts the new the 046 development. But as I say, I'm now the Fishtoft Village representative objecting to this full planning application reference B200489 for 20 affordable houses. All the arguments for rejecting and opposing application B200446 46 dwellings relate to this application, and as so eloquently put forward by my colleague Mr. Rowley Ashley, I'm sure I don't need to reiterate these points. However, I should like to add some extra. The areas of land for both planning applications are recorded by the South East Lincolnshire Local Plan, adopted in March 2019, and itemised by the South East Lincolnshire Strategic Land Availability Assessment, January 18, as FI 046 and FIS 046 and FIS 007, and records Fishtoft as a minor service centre. In your case officer's report for planning application B20049, 20 affordable houses, this area has been recorded as part of FIS 046. This is not correct. It is completely within area FIS 007, which, according to the South East Lincolnshire Strategic Land Availability Assessment, records it as unsuitable due to scale and transport, undevelopable, flood risk 3A, danger to most, according to government guidelines. Looking at the Ordnance Survey map, and even when looking at the applicant agent's master plan layout, even more so when studying it at full scale layout drawing, it can be easily said that application B20489 is well within site 007. It is very interesting to note that FIS 007 has not been mentioned at all on any of your case officers' reports. Why not? Is it because, as I say, as stated by Lincolnshire County Council, the argument for regarding this application as a rural exception site is not accepted for the reasons stated by Lincolnshire County Council: unsuitable, undevelopable, and flood risk 3A, danger to most. Ignoring these facts could bring accusations of discrimination against affordable housing residents or tenants, i.e., this authority has been made aware of the dangers but chose to disregard them when considering this planning application. The South East Lincolnshire Local Plan Policy 11 denotes the new housing allocation for Fishtoft is 50, covering the time period 2011-2036. I believe you've disregarded this policy because, not counting the 46 which you've just approved, from 2011 up until yesterday, the 26th of July 2021, approval has been given to the following planning applications, either in outline or full form, relating to Fishtoft. B15 0424, 20 houses, Norwood Yard, Church Green Road. B17 0523, 16 houses, The Sycamores, Scotia Road. B18 0012, 83 houses, White House Lane. Total 119 new house developments over new houses over 3 developments in Fishtoft. I'll repeat that, 119.
30 seconds remaining.
I was very disappointed that this application for 20 affordable houses is being considered today when the South East Lincolnshire Local Plan Policy 11 has already been far exceeded. I haven't even included B18045, 178 houses, Lindis Road, which, although could be regarded as Boston, gives Fishtoft as their address. I would urge the members not to disregard one policy in favour of another. The South East Lincolnshire Plan is a great vision for our area.
The 5 minutes has ended.
Your own need. Thank you very much, and I do urge members of Boston Borough Planning Committee to dismiss this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. Mr. Weeks, please. In your own time, Mr. Weeks. Thank you.
Chairman, members, I do appreciate the difficulties of duplication of information when 2 different applications have so much in common. You have covered a lot of the issues already, but I would like to just reinforce the positives of the affordable housing proposal. The site is set behind an avenue of new trees within the public open space and behind 2 existing mature Leylandii hedges, which provide a boundary between the proposal, the Scouts camping area, and Gacefield Road. We propose a wide tree belt along its rear boundary, creating a positive future curtilage to Fishtoft. The new houses will look over a very attractive entrance to the site. There is a lot of open space in it, and it's similar in a way to the Persimmon open space on the north entrance into Curtin. Paragraph 77 of the NPPF supports opportunities to bring forward rural exception sites that will provide affordable housing to meet identified local needs. Rural exception sites seek to address the needs of the local community by accommodating households who are either current residents or have an existing family or employment connection. I do note that you have had lots of figures put to you this morning as to why that is justified, which have been produced obviously by Mr. Horton. The objections raised have really already been covered. For instance, We don't believe there are traffic issues. Highways are in support. The primary school is not full. There is no loss of light to adjacent houses. We've covered ecology. We resolve any existing standing water with the created area of the public open space of this application. The national housing numbers issue was recognised by planning inspectors who confirmed that some grade 1 land has to be built on to achieve your housing numbers in the Boston area. The site is supported by the NPPF. Our archaeological investigation will mean that the history of the site can be explored, which actually would not happen if there was actually no development on the site at all. The affordable mix includes shared equity housing for young families to buy market housing at a discount. The overall scheme for the 46 already provides a wide mix of house types for the master plan area. The agenda shows the support that we have on this project. A new school hall will be available for community use. Every consultee other than the parish council is supportive. Your agenda is very clear on support for similar developments which allow villages to grow and thrive, and your local plan states proposal for housing on sites adjoining settlement boundaries will be permitted. This scheme, Chairman, will reflect the very popular Girls' School Lane site recently completed in Butterwick. But here, right next to the primary school, so children can have a short walk to school and a very short walk to the play area on the way home, Chairman. I agree with Mr. Carrington that the overall development is of a quality scheme which could not be identified as affordable housing purely by its appearance. In other words, Chairman, they won't look like council houses. We reflect local detailing within our designs. A sustainable drainage strategy forms the backbone of the scheme, Chairman. We have embraced the archaeological advice. Gacefield Road does not have a poor safety record according to the County Council. Safety for the Scouts is essential, hence a road hump and new post and rail fence and gates to the field opposite. We accept the Section 106 requirements put forward. There will be biodiversity gain, Chairman, and the proposals accord with the local plan and the NPPF and will provide a mix of rental and shared equity housing to meet registered local need. I believe that this attractive scheme will be a very positive development, which we will all be proud of. I do hope, therefore, Chairman, that members will support this like they did at Butterwick. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wicks. Councillor Williams, please. Could you put your microphone on and start in your own time, please?
Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Many, if not most, of the comments expressed with respect to 0488 apply equally to this application, and we'd be very grateful if that would be taken into account. I'll focus on the salient points, if I may. First is scope creep. Paragraph 2.3 and paragraph 7.4 appear to apply. This development is also to be taken as part of FIS 046, which I now understand not to be the case. But that suggests scope gallop at 66 dwellings rather than creep. That also leads on to the presentation sequence. Paragraph 3.1 notes the interdependence of this application together with 0488. Whilst this is a full application as opposed to an outline, I understand why now, because the ground has been secured through a different mechanism. However, to us, we believe this looks something like a backdoor approach to gaining acceptance of the full development. The two should have been taken together from the start. Access and traffic volumes, to bang the nail out of sight. At paragraph 6.3, we still believe the Highways Agency assessment is just plain wrong. Development should only be prevented if the residual cumulative impacts on the road network will be severe. That still applies. The business of privacy of existing dwellings, we accept that the position of this particular development is unlikely to impose upon that. As far as existing character is concerned, recommendation 10 defined the character of the materials to be used in construction, which was welcomed. This is not actually reflected in 0488. The previous comments concerning maintenance of trees, shrubs and bushes remain. As far as open space maintenance is concerned, recommendation 11 has a positive requirement for open space management, which is welcomed. Fishtoft Parish Council would like to see the detail of any final agreement before it is implemented, as if it is not adequate, the onus will devolve onto the parish. For infrastructure, then schooling division of 34,000 is noted again. Does this actually mean a higher precept for this particular estate? Services, paragraph 7.6 mentions a potentially beneficial effect on local services without defining what these might be, and the question has to be raised, what services? On the medical side, the clinical commissioning group request for 13,000 is noted. The comment on the practical impact remains. Our reservations with respect to flood risk, loss of arable land, and the archaeological impact remain. I would emphasize that we are not opposed to such a development in principle, but we simply believe this is in the wrong place. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mrs. Bush, in lieu of Councillor Mrs. Skinner, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a strange view. These are comments from Councillor Judith Skinner as ward member. My points on drainage from the last application, B200488, are relevant to this application, as are my comments on vehicle movements and needing the use of a private car to access work, doctor's appointments, etc. My main objection is that the site for the 20 affordable homes is outside the local plan scope, and making an exception of these will set a precedent for other developers. This is not a special case. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much. I will now invite committee members to ask any questions of the speakers, of course, with the exception of Mrs. Bush, who is not in a position to answer. Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask, is this development outside the local plan boundary scope, or is it still within the designated area as defined by FIS 046 of the South East Lincolnshire local plan?
We'll come to that in a moment, Councillor Brown, but this is questions to the people who have just spoken. So either the applicant's agent or Mrs. Taylor or Councillor Williams. But actually, not at this stage, because that's the question for Mr. Gildersleeve as the officer. Does anyone have any question to of the speakers? Seeing no one, thank you for that. I will now invite committee members to raise any points, and if we can take Councillor Brown's question first, Mr. Gildersleeve, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can just jump back to my screen sharing. I believed I'd covered this in the presentation, but I'll bring it up again. So for clarification, Councillor Brown, this is the application you're looking at here, the exception site here, the road coming through at the point of the cursor. The grey area on the right-hand image is the extent of allocation FIS 046, and you will see it includes this area here, okay? That would run roughly in there. So there is a very, very, very small slither of this site that falls within the allocation. But as you can see from the right-hand image, when we've overlaid that, this area, which is a substantive part of the proposal, is outside of the FIS 046 allocation. That said, that then defers to policy 19 of the local plan, which takes precedence, which does allow for development outside but immediately adjacent to the settlement boundaries. And members will note that the settlement boundary actually forms the boundary of the allocation. So policy 19 allows for rural exception sites such as this to come forward. So that is how we've approached it as set out in the principal section of the report. If I may, Chair, may I give a couple of clarifications on points that have been raised? Reference was made by one of the speakers to this site being part of FIS 007. That's entirely correct. That is the wider proposal for the wider parcel of land, which did encompass the wider field, was put forward as part of the call for sites associated with the local plan, and that was part of FIS 007, and that site as a whole was discounted on the basis that it was something in the region of 250 units. And the overall scale of development was considered to be out of keeping with the scale of growth that was identified for Fishtoft. And that was the principal basis on which that site was not taken forward for allocation. In terms of comments that were made around discrimination in relation to flood risk, as you will see from the report, flood risk has been carefully considered. As members will know, a large proportion of the borough is within high flood zones, either flood zone 2 or flood zone 3, in particular flood zone 3A. That doesn't itself preclude development within the borough, subject to the detailed policy and technical considerations, and that FRA has been presented as part of this application. Reference was made to the housing numbers for the village already having been met, but members will have heard me say before that the housing numbers in the plan are a target, they're not an upper limit. As we know with national government, the pressure is always on for the delivery of more housing. The parish council referenced the fact that this is a second application and is seen as kind of being a backdoor way to more development. That may be a perception. Unfortunately, it's quite within the applicant's rights to submit 2 applications in the manner they have. This authority have dealt with them as hybrid applications, or indeed we can treat them as 2 separate. And we are duty bound to consider the application that's before us. And the final point I'd like to just clarify is the reference to the public open space and the management and maintenance of that public open space. And as with the previous application, there is a condition, in this case it's condition number 11 on pages 62 and 63, that requires details of that management arrangement to come forward. Now that can be done in a number of different ways, as members will know, and some sites are managed by third-party organisations, some are retained by the developers, some are done through agreement with parish councils, and those agreements are reached. That condition allows for all of those opportunities to be considered and worked up prior to development commencing on the site. Hopefully that was helpful, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gildersleeve. I'm happy to open this one up to debate from committee members, and looking for who would like to kick this one off. I mean, I'm happy just to begin by reiterating that we have a clearly evidenced local need for affordable housing. This comes from our own figures as a borough council, from the housing register clearly shows that there are 38. There's a requirement for 38 people on the list in Fishtoft Village, and 68 in the wider parish, and another 33 in Freeston. So these aren't numbers that are conjured up from the wider borough. They're not conjured up from far afield. This is an identified local need, and the way I see it is that we have a clear policy. Policy 19 that allows for rural exception sites, which this is in this circumstance. It does, to my mind, to that extent, accord with policy. But I'd be happy to hear from other people. Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully support this. The South East Lincolnshire local plan requests or asks for 20% affordable homes, and this site is offering 100% affordable homes. And the reason why I support this is because I am fed up of developers building houses around here for £250,000 that nobody can afford. The average wage around here is £22,000 a year. So I think it'd be quite difficult for people to actually get a mortgage on these normal sort of size houses. So I obviously welcome this and I support this wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Just to confirm, Councillor Brown, are you moving the paper with recommendation?
Sorry, Chairman, what did you say?
Are you moving the paper with the recommendation?
Yes, I am indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at this proposal, I can see that there is a decent amount of green space associated with this development of affordable housing that is very strongly needed. In terms of the potential objections that I've heard, I feel the benefits of this scheme clearly outweigh any negatives, and I'm of a mind to support this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you seconding, Councillor Watson?
I am indeed seconding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stevens, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also supporting this. On the first plan that we saw, I thought this was by far the most attractive. So I think it's lovely and wholeheartedly support it to have 20 more affordable homes. Thank you.
Thank you, and I would concur with you, Councillor Stevens, that given that this is a full application, we have assurance that what we see on the plan is what will be built, and as these developments go in that semicircular pattern with that public open space, it does appear to be an incredibly attractive development, which would actually be a benefit to the community rather than a detraction from it. Councillor Bedford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, yes, of course, I'm going to support it. Myself and Councillor Mike Brooks in his day fought very hard to get this exception policy into the local plan. Officers were a little bit dubious once or twice about it because we could see that it was the only way that a lot of our villages would get any growth at all, because otherwise the villages were closed envelopes. So yes, I'll support it. It's absolutely brilliant that the children can walk across to school. They won't need any cars or anything, I'm sure, for 100 yards probably. Probably they may, I don't know. But no, I'm fully support it, and I bet Mr. Horton sat at the back there is hopefully clapping his hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chalmers.
Yeah, like everybody else, I'm well and truly in support of it. And I think with more affordable housing, then some of the other problems that were raised, such as lack of shops, well, if there are the people there to do the shopping, then the shops will come. So the amenities will come with the growth of the village. I think it's beautifully placed at the end there. And the green space, the parkland, I think it all just looks pretty. Which is what we want. Nobody wants a high-rise dumped in Fishtoft.
Thank you. And Councillor Austin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to be echoing much that has just been said. I think this is probably up to Mr. Wicks's the standards that we perhaps have come to expect from him. And the layout appears to be very, very pleasing, and the design good. The location is good insofar as we don't like affordable housing to be seen as, well, let's find a grotty spot and put it out there. It's in a good place with the school nearby and immediate contact with other housing. So I see that as a plus. The lady speaker earlier was concerned about all these houses having been included and built already in Fishtoft, but from memory of the local plan, if it's read carefully, Boston town is described as including built-up parts of Fishtoft and Witherton. So although there may appear to have been a lot of developments within Fishtoft, we have to accept that those parts are really just in an urban extension. No, this is good. Highways don't object, so we wouldn't have any grounds to object on that front. And the fact that it's a rural exception site, again, is good. The one thing that perhaps must be always taken into account, and hopefully when it comes to the reserved matters of the previous one, management of public open space, and also the area that goes with swales and attenuation ponds. When I think of the annual struggle that we have to get our enforcement officer every year with a little pond on Riverton West Road to get that maintenance done, get that management set up from the beginning. That's the important aspect with these. No, I'm very happy to support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. I don't see any further speakers. I thought I was about to. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. As before the previous applications, positives and negatives, let's start with the positives. First of all, it's all affordable housing. And as the housing strategy manager confirmed, there is a substantial local need for affordable housing. We all know that. I think it's a very pleasing mix of housing types. We've got terrace and semis. I thought the designs are very pleasing. We've got traditional build, brick under tile roof. But if we can be specific, I would prefer to see clay pan tiles rather than concrete pan tiles, which are very heavy. I know they look the same, but they're not. Similarly, with the soldier courses above windows, I find particularly abhorrent, but then that's a minor point. Other things, the dwelling, the DPH, dwelling per hectare is good at only 20. There's a planting scheme for trees and hedges, good. There's going to be landscaping, buffer landscaping. I think trees are going to be planted on the rear boundary. There is a drainage strategy submitted. And we know in the past that lots of sites have had potential drainage problems, but the problems are always dealt with. I mean, a classic example would be at the quadrant where hundreds of tons, thousands of tons of earth were moved. So that can be overcome. I noticed that it's going to be done, work will be done with a social housing provider. So great. The only two negatives are, first of all, I do think it's stretching the criteria for a rural exception site. It was quoted earlier by Mr. Wicks. They seek to address the needs of a local community by accommodating households who are either current residents or have an existing family or employment connection. Now, the point is that Fishtoft is a very, very big ward. It's the biggest in the borough, and it stretches over several miles. So to say that, and it was quoted, I think there were 38 people on the housing list, but in this particular part of Fishtoft, I really doubt the case. My only objection, but it's a significant one, is that most of this site is not in the SELP. Mr. Gildersleeve said, quote, a very small slither of the proposed site is in FIS 1046, and in response to Mrs. Taylor's comments, he said 007, yes, that is entirely correct. So most of it is in that site. So I'm very much in favour of affordable housing, but I'm objecting only on the grounds that most of this site is actually not in the SELP. That's all. Thank you, Chair. That's why I can't support it.
Thank you. And Councillor Skinner, please.
Well, as usual, I mean, Mr. Wicks is, anything that he puts his hand to is really, really of a high standard. I think there is a need for these houses within the village, or let's say the larger state of Fishtoft, which is quite high. What I would appeal, same on the other. There's difference between whether something meets the standard and whether it's common sense. And I will once again appeal to Mr. Wicks to work with our planning department to sort this entrance out, which will be problemsome. And I don't wish to read that we've got fatalities on our road, but that might have to be where we get to. But apart from that, I would support this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further speakers on this one, I feel we've given it sufficient debate. It is moved by Councillor Brown and seconded by Councillor Watson that permission be granted in line with the recommendations and with the conditions set out pages 59 through until 65. If Jeanette can see us all very clearly, I'm very keen to move to the vote. So those in favour of that, please show.
That's 2, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 9, Chairman.
Thank you. And those against?
That's 1, Chairman. That's clearly carried. Thank you.
Thank you. So planning permission on that is granted. And that brings us to the end of our agenda this afternoon. Thank you very much, everyone who has contributed, members of the public, and those who have spoke on both sides of the debate and representing different sides of the argument. Thank you for your contribution today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a safe journey back wherever you happen to be going to. Thank you.